Hey everyone, I'm doing a collaboration with Peerless Watercolors, and we decided we wanted to do a two-part tutorial for you all. And when I was trying to think of the things that I would want to teach you guys, I kept coming back to this painting. I had a lot of people ask how I did it, and they were really like, oh my god, that must have been like so hard, that must have taken forever. And it's actually a lot easier than you would think. It's not necessarily a beginner technique, which is why this tutorial is going to be two parts. The first part, which is this video right here, we're going to be talking about the basics of that type of painting, which is called negative shape painting. And that is like that. It's really simple, and something like this you can definitely get down your first try. It's more about practice and control and letting your paints dry. But we'll talk about that in this tutorial here. And then in the second part, I'll do a in-depth tutorial on how I did the water painting. And that video will be on Peerless's YouTube channel. So if you're interested in learning how I do this and how I use Peerless watercolors, please keep watching, and I'll link the other video in the description and in the iCard. Okay, so what you need for this type of painting is really simple: paper, water, and paints. So I'm going to be using Peerless watercolors. I'll probably be using this color here, which is Autumn's Indigo, which is my special indigo color that I helped them create, and I'm really in love with it, and it's so exciting to have my own color. But yeah, so I'm going to be using that, but you can use whatever color. I mean, even for the water part of this tutorial, I mean, you can use like pink or purple or green, like anything is totally fine, whatever you want to do. But I'll be using blue because that's my favorite. You're also going to need some place to paint on. So this right here is my sketchbook. I have my own sketchbook shop, and I'll link that in the description. But I'm gonna be probably painting on, I think, loose sheets of paper, only because it's a little bit easier for like filming. But typically I only paint in my sketchbooks, which is why all these things are in it. So whatever you want to do, as long as the paper is watercolor paper, you could totally do it. The paper in here is 140-pound Kilimanjaro paper from Cheap Joe's, and then I believe these are pieces of Fabriano Artistico that I got in like a sample set on Jackson's Art Supply. But yeah, it doesn't have to be necessarily 100% cotton. It doesn't have to be like anything super special. My favorite like student grade watercolor paper is Fabriano Studio 140-pound cold press, and it's awesome. You can do everything on it. The only thing I would say is that for the water painting, you don't want to use like rough paper, only because you are going to be doing a lot of little tiny details, and the rougher the surface, the harder those details and very crisp lines are going to be. But I've done negative shape painting on, you know, Shizzen paper or Akati paper. Those are really rough papers, and I haven't had a problem. But just for like this kind of thing, I would say cold press or hot press would be good. Your standard paper typically is cold press, so if you don't know what I'm talking about, just normal watercolor paper is totally fine. Yeah, so we got paint, we got paper. You're gonna need a little jug of water. Some people use 2 different cups of water, one being for like clean, non-messy, gross water, and then the other one to wash their brush in. I have tried that a million times, and I'm really bad at keeping one clean, so I just use one. We're also going to use a mixing palette. These two things, this and this water cup, are handmade. I'll put the makers in the description as well. But I like to use ceramic only because the paint doesn't bead up. If you can see on this side, I cleaned this side for this tutorial, but yeah, I mean, you can re-wet this and you can see the color really evenly because it's ceramic. But if you wanted to use plastic or metal, that's totally fine too. We're gonna need brushes. I'm gonna be using these two. This is a Raven, it's the smallest one they have. It's by Jackson's Art Supply, and then this one is a Winsor Newton pointed round, and it's a size 4. It's kind of gross, but it works just fine. So yeah, these are the brushes I'm going to be using. You don't have to use this specific kind. You can use, this one's natural hair, this one's synthetic, it doesn't matter. But you want one bigger one and one smaller one, especially once we get to the second part of the tutorial, because the fine details are going to be a nightmare to do with a really big brush. So I have these, and a pencil if you need one, you know, whatever. And then I'm also going to be using this heat gun because I'm really impatient and I like to dry my watercolors in between the layers. If you don't have a heat tool, you can use a hair dryer. Just be careful, you don't want to burn yourself, you don't want to burn the paper, so just be cautious. You can also just let it dry naturally, but I'm really impatient, so I have to have a heat gun when I'm painting. And the last thing would just be some paper towels to, you know, get off the excess water, and that is pretty much it. I'm gonna go ahead and set up, and then we can start diving into this tutorial. Okay, so negative shape painting is all about layers. Essentially what you do is you put a wash down of a light color, and then you paint around where you want your foreground objects to be. So this set of houses was the first color that I put down. I let that dry, and then I put in the next two, and then this one, and this one, and then this, and this, and then the background. And it's really simple. You definitely want to make sure that your layers are completely dry in between. We're gonna do something a little bit easier. We'll start with mountains, only because those are a little more freeform. If you're not good at straight lines, it doesn't really matter. So we'll do mountains, and we'll just dive in right now, and then when you feel more comfortable with the technique, you can try something like this, and then you can also go on to the next part of the tutorial. So I have everything pretty much set up. If you wanted to, you could draw out where you want your mountains to be. For mountains, because they're not really complicated, it doesn't really matter, but when I was doing the houses, I definitely did that. Sometimes I paint forests in the same way, so I'll do it then, but since this is just a tutorial, freeform, whatever, I'm not going to worry about it, but if you need to draw in mountain ranges, then that's cool. Okay, so the first thing we want to do, well, I need to clean my brush because for some reason it's pink. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is make a light wash, so that way our lightest value is still in the blue range, or whatever color you're using. You can also keep this white, but I just find that it's a little bit easier to kind of have this idea of where your painting is actually going to be instead of like trying to fill the entire space. So on my palette, I'm going to just put some water. And then I'm going to touch the paint just a little bit and then mix it in. Maybe a little bit more. Okay, so we'll see how that looks. I'm just gonna, fill in this area. It feels a little light, so I'm gonna add a little bit more paint into my wash. There we go. Sorry if you hear cars and stuff. I'm right next to a window. All right. There's a cat hair. That's fine. Let me dry it, it'll flake out. Okay, so there's our first layer. Simple, easy peasy. I'm gonna dry it with my heat gun. If you don't have one, just let it dry naturally, and then I'll meet you back here. Okay, so now that your painting is dry, and make sure it's completely dry. You don't want it to be even a little bit wet. If it is, when you put paint on, it's gonna feather out and you're not gonna get those crisp lines that we're looking for. The next thing we wanna do is make a wash that's a little bit darker than the last. So I just added some water and some paint into my palette. Now the way you think about this is the first layer is going to be your foreground layer. Sorry about the truck. So your first layer is going to be your foreground layer, so the thing that is closest to you. So I'm gonna put this at the bottom of my painting. So I want my mountain range to be maybe kind of spiky, irregular, something like that. Now, instead of filling in the bottom part, you're gonna fill in the negative space, the space around the mountain range. Something I like to do is get some more concentrated paint and put that around the edge. Once you do the next layers, you'll see the kind of effect that it gives. It almost makes it look like this foreground layer is popping out. It's like a shadow. But you don't have to do that. That's just something I like to do. Okay, so now that that's done, I'm gonna let it dry, and then I'll come back and we'll move on to the next layer. Okay, we're ready for the next layer, so all we're gonna do is make an even darker wash and essentially do the exact same thing. You don't want to go too dark too quick if you want to make a lot of mountains, a lot of different objects. Because you can only go so dark. Okay, so I think I don't want it to be the same the whole way across. If you do, that's fine. But I think I'm going to maybe make this one a little flatter and then maybe go up a lot over here. I might take some off of this and maybe not make it go up so high. Yeah, I think that's good. A little bit darker. I can see the water pooling up in these areas, so I'm taking my brush and just trying to soak some of that up so it dries more evenly. So I'm gonna now add this darker shade to the area right behind the mountain. I'm just kind of blending it a little bit, only because I don't want the line to be super harsh. All right. And that is that layer. So I'm gonna go ahead and dry this and I'll see you in a second. All right, we're ready for the next layer. We're gonna do the same thing, just make a darker wash than the last layer. And we're just gonna go in. I think I'm gonna make the high point and this one in the middle. Maybe make this disappear behind the layer in front. And now I'm gonna fill that in. If you need a smaller brush, that's totally fine. So I want to paint around this mountain, the second layer that we did. Yeah, there you go. And then maybe we'll add the darker bits at the bottom. I see this is pulling in these areas again. It's just how the paper is warping as I'm adding water. But once it's completely dry, and I'll probably put in my sketchbook, it'll be flat. I'm not worried about it. I'm gonna go ahead and dry this and I'll see you in 1 sec. Okay, I think this is gonna be my last layer, only because I'm getting really close to the top. If I would have made the first one a little bit smaller, then we could keep going, but essentially you could just do this until you feel done. There's no, required length or whatever. Okay, so I'm using a really concentrated form of this paint. I'm going to, I think I'm gonna make this one kind of go behind over here and then come up again on this side. And then we're just gonna fill it in. Sure to paint around the mountain and the last layer we did. Okay, I feel like I want to even add more darkness at the top this time, but you do whatever you want to do. There you go. Alright, I'm going to dry this and then we'll look at our finished piece. Alright, so here it is done. As you can see, super easy to do, but the results are really cool. Kind of gives you this like minimalist feeling, but there's a lot of depth and space in it, and I think that's really cool. That's why it's one of my favorite ways to paint. So this is what this one looks like, but you can do it with multiple colors. Let's see. Here's one I did here. And see, I have some purples, I have blues, I even added some colored pencil on top. There wasn't a uniform shape, I kind of just did random stuff. Here's another one I did in blue, just some little circles. Here's one I did with pink and blue. These are Peerless colors. I think this is bubblegum pink, and then that's my indigo again. So yeah, there's a lot of things you can do. You can use a million colors, you can use one. You can do a million different shapes. You can do all uniform shapes. It totally doesn't matter. Oh, here's one that I did on black paper with a white paint. It was just one layer. I was testing to see how opaque that white was, and yeah, so it doesn't even have to be that complicated, and you can get really cool results. So now we're ready to go on to the second part of this tutorial, which is going to be on Peerless's YouTube channel. So if you're interested in learning how to paint water like this, definitely go check that out. I'll link the video in the description and in the iCards, and I really hope to see you there.